Your guide to the truth. TheNewAmericanMedia.com.
Broadcasting to you live from the Milky Way galaxy, the solar system, planet Earth, North America, the United States of America, California, Los Angeles to be specific. Hello everybody and welcome to Agree to Disagree here on the TNAM Radio Network. My name is Brian Engelman, and I am very happy to have all of you with me today. And real quick side note, as I was taking a look at our Listen Live page over at thenewamericanmedia.com, you can check that out. Listen Live, click play all across the world and interstellar. Wherever you happen to be in this wonderful galaxy, you can listen live. But I did notice, and I want to take just a moment real quick to mention that tomorrow will be the 3-year mark. That would be the 3-year mark since Sean Flynn, my good friend, died in a motorcycle crash out here in California. And he was very instrumental, pardon the pun, because he was also the drummer in my band. He took the drumsticks from me so I could sing, so we could just play. But he was very instrumental to getting the New American Media going. He introduced me to his roommate Ted Distel of Distel Design, who got the website up and going. He was our original producer / co-host. He made, well, actually, here, let's listen to him one more time, and then we'll get into today's show. Of course, we're going to be talking about Ferguson. We're going to be talking about Eric Garner and all of those wonderful things. This is Sean's voice real quick.
The Unhappy Hour on thenewAmericanMedia.com.
And this one.
Your guide to the truth. TheNewAmericanMedia.com.
So yeah, it's just, I don't know, it's just kind of weird. It's cool that I get to have Sean talk on all these episodes, but it's weird because he can't really say anything anymore. So, you know, for you, Sean, thinking about you, buddy. I'll see you soon. We can jam. Yeah. Now, talking about see you soon, of course, I'll probably have to pass from this experience unless I meet some other version of Sean. You know, some sort of spirit or apparition, which is something we'll save for another show because I'm very interested in those topics. However, talking about passing from this experience, Eric Garner let's just say this as simply as possible. The story's as weird as this. An asthmatic selling cigarettes was snuffed out by a choke. And that's the story of Eric Garner. A police officer came up behind him because he was selling loose cigarettes, and he put a big chokehold on him. And you're not supposed to do that in the NYPD. Actually, you're trained not to do it, although it is technically not illegal. Anyway, point is, he kills this guy. He says all these times, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. And it just reminds me of Kelly Thomas getting killed on camera, you know, wishing that we had some sort of police video camera for in Ferguson for Michael Brown. And these people have all passed from our experience, and now you're just seeing protests and, you know, after the riots down in Ferguson. So I brought a couple people in. I definitely talked last week with Blake, the eccentric Walley, about Ferguson and the riots, and we did a show. You can check it out. It's at thenewamericanmedia.com. On our Facebook feed, do a search for The New American Media and like the page. On Twitter, we're at American_media_. And on YouTube, it's youtube.com/The New American Media. So if you go to any of those sources, just look around in politics and you'll see our show on Ferguson with Blake. So we kind of made a lot of our points known about Ferguson. However, there are differences between our reaction to Ferguson and our reaction to Michael Brown. So, Blake, welcome back, sir. How are you doing today? Thank you for joining on the program.
Thank you for having me, Brian. Great to be here.
Absolutely.
As always.
Yes, as always. Living the dream, both of us. And, you know, we thought about who we should bring in, and this is somebody that Blake and I did a show with right when Ferguson happened, and things were getting tense at the time. Dan Johnson. And I'll let Dan introduce himself because he has a new project. We know him from Panda, People Against NDAA, and it's very interesting that there's backlash on the NDAA this year. I don't know if Dan has any thoughts on that, although it's for a different reason that military pensions are being cut. Some of their co-pays are going up. It's a little complicated. I just wish they'd ban it because of Section 1021 and 1022. Alas, we know Dan Johnson from People Against NDAA, and he's starting a new project. So, Dan, welcome to the show, sir. And if you could maybe reintroduce yourself to people because you're starting a new project.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me back on the show. I think the last time I was on the show, the running joke was it's just going to be like a bunch of friends sitting around a bar, except Dan can't drink. So, regardless, good to be back on Agree to Disagree. We are launching the first ever activism consulting firm on January 1st of next year, January 1st, 2015. Basically, coaches are for teams, consultants are for corporations, politicians have campaign managers, activists haven't had anybody. You go to Google, you call a friend if you're lucky. But one of the big problems about activism is there has been no consulting firm spring up. There's been no group of people who could drop the agendas for 10 seconds and help someone with their own idea and help them take it to fruition. And that's the goal with the varied experience we've got at the Solutions Institute. And we're on Twitter at ActivistHelp, on Facebook at the Solutions Institute, and or facebook.com/activisthelp, and then solutions-institute.org.
Excellent. Well, Dan, Blake, we all talked back when this thing happened in the first place. And this thing, I'm referring to Ferguson, when the situation occurred, and we knew way fewer bits and pieces of forensic information and witness testimony and information. And now we watched what happened, obviously, with the city burning. And let's just cut forward from that. And of course, Dan, if you want to bring up your experience being down in Ferguson to work it in here, that's more than welcome. But Blake, I want to start with you because we have two new cases. One is in Cleveland, and Eric Holder just jumped in the middle of this thing. Although that police officer, I don't know if you saw that report about how he was fired or almost fired from his previous job for being immature and incompetent, and nobody checked to see that on his record, the one that pulled the trigger. We have the Cleveland situation and, of course, Eric Garner. So can you maybe, for people that aren't aware of what happened to Eric Garner, Blake, can you maybe walk us through real quick just the basics of the story as you know them, what happened with the grand jury, and how you compare this situation to what you saw in Ferguson?
All right. Well, Eric Garner was a 43-year-old man in New York with 6 kids. Father, I guess a genuinely good guy for, although he was apparently selling cigarettes under the table, untaxed, which is a petty crime, I guess. And yes, he was involved in some sort of altercation, like he was breaking up a fight or something. And the cops arrived, several of them, and they wanted to take him into custody, apparently, and they got a bit excessive, and he wound up dead. And just as you talked about the chokehold that was not supposed to be utilized, and it didn't. The situation certainly didn't warrant that. Yes, he was choked, not necessarily to death, but he was an asthmatic, had some health issues. And there's also a story, apparently he might have died from a heart attack as a result, but the choking was definitely led to the death. And I'm sorry, did you want me to say the difference between that one and the Ferguson one?
Yeah, I think we'll continue on that line of commentary, and then we'll toss it over to Dan for roughly the same question as far as the comparisons between the two cases.
Right. Now, yes, we talked about how we covered Ferguson in the beginning, and we didn't have a lot of details at first where we have a very clear video of Eric Garner. It took a little while for the facts to come out in Ferguson, but it seemed to, once the facts did come out, and especially the robbery footage, that was Michael Brown, who was involved in that one, was minutes before the altercation with the police officer, was involved in a strong arm robbery, which I think trumps, which is pretty key evidence, and I don't think a lot of people are, willing to, or maybe not have seen that part of the evidence. They kind of wanted to kind of jump to conclusions on that one. So I think there's a huge difference between the Eric Garner case and the Michael Brown case. And I would also say the Tamir Rice case we won't get into right now, but
I think we're going to have plenty of time for this Tamir Rice case.
Right.
The Cleveland officer who fatally shot him, according to The Guardian, was judged unfit for duty in 2012 with dismal records. but yeah, so we'll get to that in a little bit. But Blake, there are clear differences there, and there are some similarities. So Dan, pick it up from there. Just start whatever's on the top of your mind with this. There's so many angles to cover.
Samantha Ramsey, John Crawford, Kelly Thomas, Eric Garner, Christopher Rupe, Mike Brown. What do they all have in common? They were all killed in the past 5 months, and their killers are all cleared. Now, there are differing circumstances. For Samantha Ramsey, the cop claimed that she ran over his foot, so he ended up on the hood of her car firing bullets into her. For John Crawford, the police
let's do this. Let's do this one by one, though, Dan. Is that the one in the white car, the college student, the nursing student?
Yeah, the nursing student in Kentucky.
Oh God, yeah.
Yep. John Crawford, Beaver Creek, Ohio. Beaver Creek Walmart. Police claim he was waving a gun around and pointing it at other patrons in the store. The 911 caller also claimed that in the call to police. Video came out showing he dropped the gun, dived behind the shelf as the bullets hit him, and died as police rushed to Walmart. And it was a fake gun, by the way.
Yeah, it was. That one was actually. I've been to that Beaver Creek Walmart actually, and the gun was picked up, I believe, off of their shelves. It was a toy gun that he picked up off of their shelves. He's just walking around talking on his cell phone, blah blah blah. Just time to kill, just putzing around, hanging out, and I believe that's referred to as swatting. It's something that I need to see more criminal charges brought up on the people that make these phone calls, these moms against guns demand action, and these Michael Bloomberg's groups of mayors against illegal guns. And this is one of the tactics that people in these groups are teaching people in their groups so that they can shame, conceal, hold permit holders into not carrying. They're trying to push for Kroger to ban concealed carry or open carry. And it's, won't you think of the children? And they're actually teaching people, call the police, call 911, give a description of who it is, and say that he's acting erratically or he has a gun and he's threatening people and he's pointing at people. So they come in, the police, that could be your uncle, it could be one of your friends, somebody that you've worked with in the past, or someone you played football with, and this cop comes running in trying to defend people. That's how his mindset or her mindset is set at the time. And they come in and they just blow somebody away because they're freaked out because somebody's lying on a 911 call. Sorry, I want you to continue, but that was an angle I really wanted to make clear to people, and I think it's important after watching that John Crawford video. So, I'm sorry, please continue with the list.
And so I will I'm glad you took that tangent. But going back to the list, Kelly Thomas, anybody who doesn't know his name should be paying better attention. Homeless man beaten to death by 2 LAPD police officers. Police officers cleared. Eric Garner, recently, we were just talking about it, Long Island, New York, Staten Island, New York, choked by a police officer while several police officers are on top of him, and died of compression of the neck. Christopher Rupe walked to the door with a Wii remote in his hand, gunned down by the officer in Georgia. The deputy cleared of any charges, not indicted. Mike Brown, I don't need to go into. Everyone knows, very familiar at least, with a lot of the different discussions there.
Right.
According to an article in the Durango Herald, quote, the title being Officer Indictments Quite Uncommon. Quote, none of the Albuquerque officers in more than 40 police shootings since 2010 have faced charges. End quote. There's an article in a Washington newspaper. I'm trying to find it right now, but there's an article in a Washington newspaper called Bulletproof Part 3, or Houston Chronicle rather. Bulletproof Part 3, Hard to Charge, points out that the last time an officer in Chicago was indicted for a police shooting was 2007. And one out of 128 officers in a shooting was indicted in Houston. What is common between these two cases, and what is common sickeningly common in several other cases, is a huge data disparity. In 162,000 federal cases, federal grand jury cases, grand juries return an indictment in all but 11 of them in 1 year.
That's 11 out of how many? 11 out of how many?
162,000.
All right.
So, and this is according to the 538 blog run by Nate Silver, predictor of election results many times over. So, we have grand juries who regularly indict, according to former New York Chief Justice, a ham sandwich, and yet refuse to indict a officer under any circumstances, basically. Problem is, with the Mike Brown case, we don't have video. We have video afterward. We have eyewitness testimony, which is typically unreliable. And we have shady pasts for both of the characters involved. We have officer testimony, which is extremely rare in a grand jury, but is present in both the Eric Garner case and in the Darren Wilson, or in the Mike Brown case in Ferguson. And we're looking at what you put enough data points together, it becomes a trend. Grand juries indict almost everyone except for police officers involved in shootings. So I think that's a very important data point to come up with. The difference is, as one Twitter user pointed out, is illegal chokehold, as you pointed out, violates NYPD policy, not necessarily illegal, but
against policy, right?
Chokehold, illegal. On film, doesn't matter. I can't breathe.
Yeah, you know what, Dan, let me jump in there and ask Blake, because I know you were watching The Daily Show, and I happened to catch the clip of Jon Stewart. And you know, John was getting to the core of this matter about things being on tape and saying, oh yeah, the president's saying, oh yeah, let's get this all on tape because of, you know, for example, what happened in Ferguson. At least we'd have some sort of evidence of, you know, timeline and distance, and you know, you could get some information other than just what cops will say to protect themselves, or what criminals will do to protect themselves, or sympathizers will say to protect one of their own. You know, but there's a lot of concern that it would be a federal situation bringing in cameras, and that the feds would start to take over and militarize the local police, and they'd lose their jurisdictional capabilities. But I mean, Blake, my specific question is, you know, like Jon Stewart said, and like we were talking about, with Eric Garner, we had video. How in the world could a grand jury not at least say, holy crap, we need to send this to a trial so that they can really hash out all of this evidence? He was begging for air. He couldn't breathe. They choked him and killed him on camera. I mean, what do you make of all that, Blake?
Well, yeah, it's a travesty, and I'm glad we found something that, you know, we can agree on. Like people on the left and the right, and people are outraged, and maybe these people in New York, they just have this, you know, history, this deep-rooted police corruption, and they're just it's just business as usual. But maybe they're not paying attention that this is a national, if not worldwide, story here. We're all watching, and yeah, they're calling for, you know, body cameras as the solution to prevent these things, and then they just throw it right in our face, and we're all sitting here trying to figure out how did they not get some sort of indictment for something, whether it was like a manslaughter or what have you. Yeah, we certainly have a reason to get together and have outrage over this and get something done, because this sets a very dangerous precedent. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely there's some right and wrong with that. I don't want to sit and demonize all the cops. I mean, certainly, you know, I totally agree that Kelly Thomas was executed, the homeless guy in New Mexico. The thing with Tamir Rice looks really bad for the police.
Yeah, Kelly Thomas that was Fullerton, California police out here. The New Mexico one was a different one. But yeah.
Yeah, that's another homeless guy. Yeah,
the other guy was camping in New Mexico. kind of
the other
happened at the
homeless
same
guy.
time.
Yeah. Now the Michael Brown one I have to throw out. We saw the video footage from minutes before in the robbery, so we could only imagine what Wilson saw, and he didn't seem to have any history. So I just want to be intellectually honest here and say that I try to be fair on all of this stuff. But the Eric Garner clearly deserves some questioning, deserved to have a bigger trial coming up, and I don't know what comes next. We need to keep the pressure on the New York PD, police department, the government up there. Certainly, this can't stand. They're going to have to do something, and I don't want to just crucify this officer who obviously probably wasn't intending to murder this guy, but at the very least, there's got to be some sort of a manslaughter charge and a huge settlement going to this family. So I don't know. I'll stop there.
Yeah, I mean, there's supposed to be some sort of excessive force being used. But the man was obese. He was resisting the officer. He was an asthmatic.
Slightly, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so of course, and I wrote this on, and I pinned this to the top of our Facebook feed if you want to, I don't know, it's kind of a stream of consciousness, so I just wanted to repeat this for people who might not have heard it. My comments on this earlier were Eric Garner was not killed because he was black. Eric Garner was killed because he was selling untaxed cigarettes. Eric Garner was selling them because the black market that developed because of huge nanny state crippling taxes levied on cigarettes by politicians who, quote, care about you. Refer to our ridiculous failed war on drugs and remember that prohibition and huge taxation did not work for booze or for the Stamp Act on American colonists. Garner was killed because he resisted arrest. Garner was killed because the police act way too violently. Sometimes police act too violently because they're idiots. They were poorly trained, or because we the people are all viewed as people who could kill them instead of their bosses. I can't find any fault with a good cop who just wants to go home at night to their family after risking their day for the greater good of the community to prevent lawlessness. Good cops are heroes, period. Bad cops need prosecuted, period. Look on YouTube and watch the Fullerton, California police kill Kelly Thomas on video as he cries out to his dad for help. These murderers were charged, and the jury let him walk. Unbelievable. Police violence has escalated as many of us now fear a police state right out of the book 1984. Unconstitutional Fourth Amendment violating stop and frisk and DUI checkpoints are strong examples, while MRAP military tanks on our streets violating posse comitatus is another. At the same time, oath keepers do exist, and we need them on our side to defend our God-given rights and fight the globalists who want to financially cripple and enslave all of us. So please remember, not all cops are bad. Not all blacks are criminals. Not all whites are racist. Take it on a case-by-case basis. Kelly Thomas was the worst police murder I have ever seen, and it made me cry. Eric Garner was terrible to watch, and I wish that Garner had complied with the arrest, and I wish that the cop would not have choked the man over a loosie cigarette. Michael Brown attacked a cop, and we have no video. In closing, on a local basis, we need to demand that all police officers film every interaction with we the people, but keep the feds away. Filming protects both the Darren Wilsons and the Eric Garners of the future. Prayers to every family involved in a death resulting from a police action. And I wanted to ask you specifically, Dan, kind of in the same vein that I asked Blake, having cameras on all of the police, we already had it with Eric Garner. What more could we ask for in trying to protect ourselves from overly violent actions from police that result in death?
Well, let's cover a few things and then get to that question if you don't mind.
Sure thing.
And work our way there. Number one, I think it's very important to talk about. We're probably going to have a difference on how we think the grand jury verdict should have gone in Missouri.
I think so.
But
yeah.
One of the things that's important to point out is Mike Brown's lawyer, on the day that the video footage was released, called the footage of him entering the gas station, and according to that set of cameras, he stole, and according to another set of cameras, he didn't. But according to that set of cameras, he stole Rellos from the gas station. He called it a character assassination. And I tend to agree, because when Darren Wilson's, the only known video of Darren Wilson ever performing Stop in Ferguson was taken, It's about a 30-some-odd second video, surfaced a couple months later, and came with a police report proving Darren Wilson had made the arrest. Darren Wilson says one thing, and that is, the man says, "I'm filming you." Darren Wilson says, "No, you can't," and takes his camera away from him. And I think this is important to note if we're going to talk character.
I think that's a great point, by the way. Let me. You were gonna go on a couple of tangents, or not tangents.
Yes.
Let me rephrase that. You were gonna make a couple of points there, Dan.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have those firmly in mind? Can you jot down little notes so we don't take you off track? Because I just wanted to say that I think that is a very good point. Any cop, any police officer that is going to harass we the people, their bosses, for filming them. If we're not right on top of them in invading a crime scene or threatening their safety, if we're at a reasonable distance, I mean, we should all be filming every police action we see from a few feet away safely, because we need the protection from them, by them, for everybody involved. We need that. But I wanted to pause it there because I know we only have Blake for just another minute. Yeah, exactly. Right. So I was wondering if you had any other final thoughts, as you got to bounce out of the conversation, unfortunately.
Right. I saw that clip that Dan's talking about. It's a little clip that somebody took on their cell phone where it looked like to some people. There's no context in there, so we don't actually know what happened. Yeah, you don't want to tell people you can't film, but we don't know what happened before that. I mean, this was like these people like in this crappy yard with all of this junk all over the front. You know that they were probably not a pain in the ass to deal with. So we don't know exactly what happened. Anonymous came out and was saying that Wilson was tied to the KKK. We've got grand jury testimony that says he's never even used his weapon before. We haven't seen any evidence that he was a racist. We don't have anything to say here. And the fact that there was no hands up, don't shoot. Right, and I don't know if Dan has actually seen the robbery footage, whether he stole anything. We clearly see him leaving the store and roughing up the owner of that store, the clerk. So,
I find it just before you go, I find it interesting that you both say we can't know and then that we do know. You say we can't know what happened, yet we do know because there's stuff in the guy's yard that we must know that the guy was a pain to deal with. I find that to be a real leap in logic, and I would just kind of challenge that before you go.
All right, but where's the context of that whole video? We saw one little tiny piece. We don't know what happened before he pulled out his camera, and that's the only thing that we can say negative about Wilson?
Where's the context in the robbery video? That video was pulled from 3 of the store's 6 surveillance cameras. Where's the context?
Okay, Dan, we can kind of agree that he was involved in this robbery minutes before he encountered Darren Wilson, and he was in the middle of the street and was ordered to get out of it, ignored the orders. There was an assault. He tried to go for his gun.
Wait. Before we even get into that, we're talking about the robbery. So how is there a robbery if the person that he supposedly robbed from doesn't agree that it was a robbery?
I don't know where you're getting that source, and I haven't seen that.
The store owner never once agreed. The store owner that he supposedly stole from never once agreed that Mike Brown stole from him. In order for it to be a robbery, now we can agree that Mike Brown pushed
Where
the
is
guy.
your source on this? I'm not trying to be combative here, but what source did you pull up on this, where it says that the store clerk has said that was to back up what you said?
Store owner did not report. I'll pull it up as we're actually talking here. I have my computer in front of me.
And let Dan pull it up and jump back in once Blake finishes his point, because I know we only have you for another second. So leave the reference here. Whether we get a chance to get back to it with Blake or without Blake. But Blake, I guess since you got to bounce, and unfortunately, I wish we could keep you over for a few more segments, because this is about to be an awesome conversation. I think maybe we should just go ahead and do it again. Although I'm really sick of talking about both these stories.
It doesn't matter. I don't want to get into, we don't need to get involved in that one, and we don't need to get involved in Trayvon or anything like that. I think what point I would want to leave it with is that the most important thing is, people, with Trayvon or with Michael Brown, those are divisive issues that we are not going to agree on. But we need to focus. I think if we really want to affect change going forward, people need to we need to get behind the issues that we can all agree upon. issues like Eric Garner or maybe Tamir Rice, at least what we know so far, or the police militarization, or of course what Dan does with Panda, NDAA, and we can focus on those issues and we can really make an impact. And what I'm worried about with these new protests is that they're trying to they're conflating all of them together, and we're not going to get everybody involved if we're not going to be able to agree on what cause we're fighting for.
Yeah, and what's the name? The guy that works with Infowars, Paul Joseph Watson. He was saying today, some people are talking about race and Black Lives Matter, and I almost completely agreed with this guy. I just don't see race in here. I see police abuse. I see really treating us like cattle. We're the bosses, and they have this completely backward. And what Paul Joseph Watson said, and I thought it was great, he said, this isn't a black and white issue. Some people are saying, check your privilege, and you have white privilege, and you don't know what it's like. And we've seen a lot of people from Charles Barkley and man, there was a pastor out here in California came out and said some amazing stuff, just shooting this stuff down, saying if you got a problem in 2014, it's not because of slavery 200-300 years ago. It's your own damn problem. And what Paul Joseph Watson was saying, to get back to that, he said this isn't a black privilege or a white privilege issue. This is a blue privilege issue. This is the police having different sets of rules for themselves, and they're not facing the consequences for really kicking us around like a stray dog. And you shouldn't even kick stray dogs, for the love of God. I mean, we are being treated very poorly by the people that we employ as police to protect and serve us, not to serve the shit out of us. Like those memes say, we're here to protect and serve you, and they're cracking skulls open. But at the same time, Blake, and I'll give you the final word, and then we'll get back to Dan. At the same time, you want to protest. You want to make some signs. You want to make your voice heard. Do it, but stay the hell out of the damn streets. Stop burning things. You have the right to protest, but you don't have the right to be an asshole. Because I really think, and I am very strong in my belief on this, it does the cause a huge disservice to burn things down and to block traffic. You saw that video of the guy going late for work. He's like, I got 5 kids, I'm going to work. It was in San Diego. Some idiot college students blocked the road saying hands up or something. And This guy's like, get the hell out of the road. You got problems? We all got problems. I got a job to get to, and I'm going to get fired if I don't get to it. You have no right to be here doing this to me. A woman comes out from behind. She's like, I'm a nurse. I got to get to the hospital. I'm caring for people that are literally going to die if I can't get there. What the hell are you guys doing? So I think it does anyone that cares about our civil liberties and our Bill of Rights, it does us a huge disservice to be out there making an ass out of yourself, because that's just going to what's going to happen? We're going to get more beatdowns by the police. There's going to be more restrictions on free speech. There's going to be more warrantless searches and more DUI checkpoints and more illegal tracking on your phones through Twitter to see who activists are. People will disappear through the NDAA because they've seen governments overthrown in Egypt and they're freaked the hell out. And they should be freaked out because their corruption isn't going to last much longer. But the point is, if we don't act cool, we're making this happen a lot faster. We're giving it a shot of steroids to come beat us down with MRAPs in the middle of our streets as the town is burning. So, I mean, that's my final word, Blake, and I'll give you your final word on your way out the door, and we'll get to Dan.
I think I'm set on that. I just want to let the police in New York, the New York PD, the whole power structure over there needs to be put on notice. And this isn't just, they're not in their own little bubble now. They've really screwed this one up. And, the world is watching. We're going to be following it. And they really pushed a little too far, way too far. And this was a bad mistake. And we can't have cameras and stuff, and if they're going to just, throw it in our face like that. So I don't know what else to say about that, because I guess we're going to see what happens. Because I know there's obviously big protests going on in New York right now, and it'll be interesting to see how they respond to that. And I think that's really all I've got to say for now. But thank you for having me on the program. Good to hear from you, Dan. And no, take care. I'll look forward to hearing the rest of this later on when I get time. And take care. And I'll talk to you guys soon. And
Good.
Centric
Okay,
99.
Yeah, Eccentric99. Make sure you're following him on Twitter. Blake does a lot of good research, finds some good stuff there. And yeah, thanks for joining us. You know, like I said, I am just about Fergusoned out. This Garner thing really upsets me, and I'm not done with it. But I just don't know how much more I can talk about it because it's in such
let me move on to what I was going to say before we went down on that tangent.
Yes, please.
I will first of all state the source. The source is fox2now.com. Store owners speak out about surveillance video after release.
What was the date on that? What was the date on that one, if you still have it in front of you?
The date on that is August 15th, 8/15.
Okay, because 4 months later, I really hadn't heard anybody that was disputing it after the fact. Maybe it was the shop owner didn't want to have his store burned and looted, and it was anyway. I don't know. We can look into that one particular point.
We can, but the reason I brought that up in the first place,
right?
And it wasn't to go on a character attack of my own against Wilson. It was to point out that individual actions should be judged individually. And if we're going to go character attack, then we can't now tie it to the grand jury case. Because you can do the same thing in the Eric Garner. You can say, well, he had a record of misdemeanors.
What record of misdemeanors did we have? Do we know exactly how many?
He had all that the source I read said he had a record of nonviolent misdemeanors.
Okay.
So I don't know what they were, and it would be dishonest to say that I do. But that's a point that could be made. Oh, well, look, Eric Garner had a record of misdemeanors. The Cleveland, Cleveland.com did the same thing with the Tamir Rice case. They released an article saying that his father had a history of domestic abuse. I find that really telling, and it's a classic media tactic. It's either guilt by association or guilt by association with a previous incident, so guilt by history. And I think it's really important not to do that, because often those who the police will really go after aren't people who several would sympathize with. You look after 9/11, who got arrested, over 1,000 Muslims got arrested after 9/11 in a mass counterterrorism sweep. They got arrested without charges and without trial. Several of them were deported. Most of them were forgotten. The state was able to do that because they were not a very liked group after 9/11.
Well, I'll give you that point. However, I would like to say that if you take a dead 12-year-old's father's previous domestic something that I don't know exactly what happened compared to what this guy Michael Brown was doing just minutes before he allegedly attacked a police officer, tried to obtain his gun, and then put his head down and ran. Dang if that man didn't run at the police officer like a football player, said an eyewitness, a black eyewitness, by the way. I just say there's a little bit of a difference between saying this happened a few minutes ago with the same guy that you just saw throwing into a display case of Lay's potato chips versus a 12-year-old's dad's domestic situation I don't know how long ago. A little different, but I do get your point. You got to judge them on a case-by-case.
You have to judge them on a case-by-case basis, and you can't say it's the same reason that there's different sentencing laws for different crimes. You can't say, well, because he was robbing a store, that deserves a death sentence. And you can
third strike
at a very peripheral level.
Right. No, I was just going to say third strike selling loosies should not be the death sentence. Unfortunately.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's happened in the Eric Garner case, is he's selling cigarettes and not giving the government, the hungry thugs, their cut of the profit.
Can you talk about the hungry thugs' profit, though? Because, Rand Paul was out there making the case about when you heavily tax something and then you use the power of the state. I don't know if you want to cover that angle, but that's a very interesting one. It's very interesting.
I do, and before we get off the radio, I want to talk about good cops and the concept of a good cop. And I also want to talk about grand jury solutions and a solution to what is a systemic problem. It's not just a random case-by-case. When you're faced, I've never seen such numbers like that. 162,011 returned not indicted. And then I've pulled up a couple hundred non-indictments.
Yeah,
these are different levels of grand jury, obviously, but I've never seen statistics that so heavily bias one way or another.
See,
like
and that's kind of what I feel like over the past 20 years or 30 years of me being a Cleveland Browns fan. We've played people in the AFC North about 162,000 times, and we have like 11 wins. I'd like to see Nate Silver do a breakdown of what it means to be a Cleveland sports fan with Indians, Browns, and Cavs and all their futility over the years.
Try being a Michigan fan the last 10 years.
Thank you for that, sir. It's been a good time. But hey, kudos to Denard Robinson. That was very classy when not Braxton Miller, when J.T. Barrett broke his ankle and he came over and offered some words of support, got down on knee and put his hand on his shoulder pad or whatever, and they took that picture. That was a very classy move from Denard Robinson, someone I haven't liked for a few years, but he's graduating, so yeah, go Buckeyes. Hopefully we can crack the top 4. But that's for my sports show. I digress. You were saying you those numbers, 162,000 to 11, is just absolutely ridiculous, and you see a grand jury problem.
Yeah, and I see a systemic problem, so we can talk about that somewhere in the show. But anyway, you were saying.
Oh, I say lots of things. I want to hear about the grand jury problem.
Okay, well, let's look at the grand jury problem. First of all, most people don't even know how a grand jury is set up. I'm fortunate enough to know Kelly Mordecai has written a couple books on the grand jury system and has actually been studying the situation pretty closely.
Yeah, give us that Reader's Digest version. Explain that in like a Wikipedia or like some kind of grand juries for dummies.
Yeah, so the grand jury system was set up to choose whether or not to charge people, essentially. That's the idea, is should we even charge this person? Because there's prosecutorial discretion as to whether or not to press charges, so to speak.
Okay.
So the grand jury system was set up as a fourth branch. It was independent from the government. The prosecutor came in, presented evidence, and that's it. The foreman of the grand jury was elected by members of the grand jury. It was set up as a secret proceedings because they didn't know better. No, I mean it was set up secret proceedings to supposedly protect the witnesses and protect the evidence and ensure that there wouldn't be what's known as a tainted pool. So they did that,
and there actually are questions now. If one of those people, I think the only person that died in the Ferguson riots, and then he was lit on fire with accelerants, gasoline or kerosene, and then burned in his car. People are wondering about if that guy was one of the grand jury people that told what they saw, and the community didn't like it because it contradicted the glowing narrative. I'm still trying to track that story down. But yeah, the grand juries are usually or almost always, by definition, anonymous, so that you can, so you can return to your community and you don't have a stigma or a target attached to your back if someone doesn't like what you thought about something.
It's supposedly supposed to prevent this type of mob justice. And so they hand out indictments. That's basically what they do, or they hand out you're cleared of all charges because you were, at this point, you'd have to be an angel and literally show them the wings. But that being said, what's happened to the grand jury system is, as government loves its creeping capacity, the prosecutor has started to replace the foreman of the grand jury. Not officially. The jury foreman, they still have a foreman, they still have this independent on paper. But what's started to happen is, since they work so closely with the prosecutor basically tells them how to do. And as Americans have, or at least the pool of Americans for grand juries, have gotten, let's say, progressively stupider, they continue to rely on the prosecutor to tell them how it's done. How it works. This is how jury nullification fell out of the court system, is now the jurors look to the judge to tell them how things work. They look to the prosecutor. The prosecutor is the guy who guides you along, who suggests charges, and you don't want to be there. You're randomly chosen, so you're there. You're performing a jury duty, and you have a guy who's literally going to walk you through the entire process, no holds barred, do whatever, and you do. And so what happens is grand juries become the prosecutor's training pit, basically. And anyone the prosecutor doesn't want them to indict, they don't. And anyone the prosecutor does want them to indict, which is pretty much everyone else, they do. And so we've got a systemic problem in the grand jury system that wasn't foreseen, by those who put it together, the framers or the founders, however you want to call it. But the systemic problem we have is we have turned from a adversarial grand jury system where you've got
When it's us,
people.
when it's the people on trial, it is adversarial.
Exactly. And that's where you have a jury, and you have an attorney, and you have all this stuff. But with the grand jury system, it used to be, at least at its start, supposedly, I mean, we don't have the greatest records from back then, but supposedly it used to be somewhat adversarial. Prosecutor would come in and then would leave, and the grand jury would be kind of opposite the prosecutor in some cases, opposite the defendant in others, and the defendant would really show up. Usually you don't know if there's a grand jury convened to charge you. So what's happened is it has become a conflict of interest because the grand jurors are basically just they work for the prosecutor, essentially. And so if we're going to talk about solutions to the grand jury system, one of the solutions we should be talking about is removing that conflict of interest. Well, how do you do that? You can't really completely remove the conflict of interest because the prosecutor may know someone and not say it, but one thing you can do is you can change the way and the system works by state. So they have a little bit different rules, and it's actually in Missouri's constitution that they will try crimes or will look at cases by grand jury. So does not require a federal level shift. But what you can do is you can make it so if someone has been in the past or is currently employed by a government, that their case will go straight to trial. It will not go to a grand jury. That they are considered public servants, and because they're considered public servants, they are held to a higher standard. Thus, they do not get the protection that a grand jury may provide them.
Would there be any harm in that? I guess maybe right off the bat, if anyone alleges anything, you could imagine a lot of bad guys in jail are going to allege a lot of things. If a grand jury doesn't predetermine, holy crap, there is literally nothing here. It's just this guy in prison. He's got an axe to grind. Everybody in prison would have an axe to grind. I would imagine everybody in prison's innocent. I don't know, would that clog up the courts, or is there something unexpected? Because I like what you're saying on the surface. I'm just trying to instantly think of the flip side to that.
I'm not sure if it would necessarily clog up the courts. I think you would have more accusations at first, especially when you started to change the system. After a while, people would get used to it. But I think the first reaction would be a lot more cases against agents of the state. But I also don't think that's a bad thing. If my 2.5 going on 3 years of activism is any indication, there are a lot of cases against the state and against agents of the state that should have gone through. And at the expense of perhaps clogging up the justice system for a while as people are trying to abuse the new system, at the expense of clogging up the justice system for a bit, I would say that if the lives I'm looking at are any indication, a couple hundred lives per year being saved because the grand jury system is adversarial again, I think that would be worth it.
Interesting. No, and I'll tell you what, that's something I just really started thinking about, so I want to kind of marinate on that a little bit more. But I think what happened in the Mike Brown situation is that I don't think there was ever evidence to charge Darren Wilson, and I think because of race hustlers like Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson and President Obama and Eric Holder, these guys see everything through everything being racist. Everything is an injustice. The Cambridge police acted stupidly, and you have the Eric Holder up in Cleveland. What was it today? I get the point of some of it, but I looked at whatever evidence I found, and then I gathered more as the Mike Brown case went through. I never saw evidence of any reason to bring Darren Wilson up on any charges, and I think it was just they caved to the race hustlers and political pressure. And so I think when they put up a really weak case, I think they did do it intentionally, but I can't really say that because they did include, 60, 80 different witnesses. There was a lot of information that they covered, and I'm glad we got to see it, although that was very unorthodox that we were able
Well,
to
we
see it.
didn't get to see it. Don't go that far. We did not get to see it. All of the evidence, save the testimonies in the grand jury case and on a couple of the autopsies, the vast majority of evidence is hidden.
The autopsies were huge, though, because that just confirmed he was never hands up, don't shoot, surrendering, shot in the back. That was the original story we heard, and it was never true that that was the case.
Well, it's also important to note that you can argue that she is covering herself or she received threats, or you can argue that there's a conspiracy behind it. But there were several autopsies done, and I can't pinpoint which one it was.
There were at least three of them.
Autopsies,
there were three, and none showed any bullet wounds through the back.
In one of the autopsies, the 3 or 4 people who had worked on that autopsy had been quoted in several conservative, or had been, the autopsy had been trotted out in several news sources, particularly conservative ones, saying that, well, this proves that there was no hands up. And in a CNN article, a CNN interview, all 3 of, I want to say they were coroners, all 3 of the coroners or medical examiners who worked on that autopsy said in no way is this conclusive that there was not hands up, and here's why. So I think it's important to also not go, okay, well, that was enough evidence. If the grand jury heard 3 months of evidence, and we have 3 autopsies to work with, and one set of a little bit of testimony, that's a bit of a problem. And that's why I would say, again, I take the position, I don't take the position that Darren Wilson was guilty. I take the position that the corruption that he had been involved in prior, and the general, especially the prosecutor. I think the key thing for me is the prosecutor's unfitness to try this case. With the past 30 years or 20 years as a prosecutor having never brought any charges against an officer under his watch.
So you don't have a problem then that his father was killed by a black guy when he was younger?
You're going to talk that domestic violence in the Tamir Rice case, that his father having a history of domestic violence, did not mean the officer could shoot him. I'm also going to say, and also I think it's important, you brought up race earlier.
Wait, but you're also going to say that
part of this.
You're also going to say that you're not going to go there and say that he's unfit because his dad was killed by a criminal at one point. Because I heard a lot of people say
I'm not going to say that. No, absolutely not.
Man, I laid a nice trap for you. I wrote down a note, too, because I said unfit and hyphen, and I was going to be like, but what about what he said? Okay, very consistent. Please continue, sir.
I do my best. But, yeah, I mean, and then that's the point, is we have to be consistent about this. We have to look at this, and what my consistent position has been since the verdict is neither Mike Brown nor Darren Wilson got a trial. They got a trial in the court of public opinion. They had a trial at court of public opinion in August, and they've been having a trial since then. And there's been nonstop coverage from our favorite news networks since then. But neither of them ever got a trial. And if we're going to be intellectually consistent, we're going to leave it at one thing. The one thing should be there's no video, and there was no, or 2 things. There's no video, and there was no trial. I'm okay if there's video but no trial. I'm okay if there's open trial, rather. And I would rather there be video, but I'm okay if there's trial and no video. The problem that there is neither of those, and so we have he said, she said, and in the past, 100 and some odd years, he said, she said is always won by the cop.
Yeah,
we have a bit of a problem with assessing the integrity of the trial process. And that's all I would say is I've been consistent. I will stay consistent. There was no trial. I am not, however, going to go and indict Michael Brown, or I'm not going to go out and say, well, he was wrong. I'm just going to say there was no trial, there was no video. We don't know.
Well, I'll say we do have a he said, she said. However, this according to off this article from smokinggun.com, it says included in the grand jury material released tonight. This was on the night it happened. No charges will be filed. where's this at? Filed in Michael Brown killing is a handwritten witness account stating that the teenager charged at Officer Darren Wilson like a football player, head down. The unidentified witness wrote that the 18-year-old Brown, quote, had his arms out with attitude while the cop just stood there. The witness added, dang if that kid didn't start running right at that cop like a football player, head down. The witness told of hearing 3 bangs, but the big kid wouldn't stop. And Wilson claiming...
So on that note, what about Dorian Johnson's testimony? Dorian Johnson's testimony that he was indeed shot while running away from.
Well, there was 0 forensic evidence for that. 3 autopsies. Holder was begging that was the case. Sharpton and Obama, they would have loved to see bullet wounds.
I never said hands up. I said running away. Autopsies don't talk anything about running away. So, because the autopsies sure as heck don't prove that he was on top of Officer Wilson when the shots were fired.
Well, it shows that he wasn't shot in the back.
It
appearing
shows
to run away.
That, including the picture evidence, shows he was 158 feet away from the police cruiser instead of 30, like the police had originally argued. But that being said, my question is, what about his witness testimony? If you're going to say his witness testimony doesn't really match up, then what about, why are you bringing in another witness testimony?
Yeah, I don't believe Dorian Johnson. I don't believe him.
You just straight up don't believe him?
No. His background, his record, his track record. Yeah.
Okay, so because of his past, not because
involved in the robbery, also
earlier.
involved walking down the middle of the street. I mean, he was the accomplice to this guy that was doing what he was doing. But yeah, I mean, to relitigate the case, you and I had talked a little bit off air, and we are seeing this from different points of view. But what is important, Dan, I want to get to this because we talked about this off air, and I think it's very important. You're talking about how the justice system needs to be adversarial, especially with the police. Not because we don't like them or appreciate what they're doing, but because we need a very high scrutiny, a very high level of, put it underneath the microscope, and really find out and investigate what's going on. You brought up John Adams, and I think it's very important in the context of how you brought up the people rounded up after 9/11 and the fact that Nate Silver saying only 11 out of 162,000 grand juries, don't return a go get 'em verdict, but it always happens with the police. Talk to us a little bit about John Adams, because you made an amazing point earlier, and it really is at the core of our justice system, regardless of how we specifically feel about this specific case.
Just to be extremely blunt with your listeners, the way to solve all of this is not to have police that operate off your stolen money. But that being said, going on to the adversarial justice system, if we're going to have a justice system that's forced on us, at the very least it needs to be adversarial. And one of the big reasons is there was the Boston Massacre was a huge flashpoint just before the Revolution, about 6 years before the Revolution. And on that day, the revolution was about to start, basically. People were done. They were mad. They were in the streets, and then several of them were shot by British soldiers. Well, no one, because the colonies weren't exactly, that particular area of the colonies wasn't exactly a fan of British soldiers. No one was willing to step up and defend them. So John Adams, a pretty well-respected man at that time, said, I'll defend them. And people were incredulous. How dare you defend these murderers? And he said, look, we need to defend these people. I need to defend them because they deserve a trial too. And John Adams, not believing necessarily that the soldiers were right, argued his best to defend those soldiers and prevent them from getting any charges. And that is the key of the adversarial system. They have to have a defense. Somebody needs to defend them. So in the case of the prosecutor here, the prosecutor needs to do his job, which is to prosecute, and which is to go after him with a fervor and with a vengeance, regardless of how he believes the case should be or should end up. Darren Wilson deserves a trial just as much as Mike Brown does, and the prosecutor's job is to go after the person that the state is targeting or that is facing charges.
Let me ask you, if somebody breaks into my house and I shoot and kill him, as I feared for my life, would I have to stand a trial if I didn't do anything wrong? Like, where's my protection from a ridiculous process that could cost me my entire life? You know,
ridiculous. Go ahead.
Yeah, just because that's what I keep thinking. Like, I looked at the evidence of the Darren Wilson, Mike Brown situation. I looked at Trayvon. I looked at Zimmerman, and I mean,
well, Trayvon and Zimmerman are a different thing because that was an actual open trial. So don't confuse the two.
Oh, no, not confusing them. Just like Kelly Thomas did go to trial with Ramos and Campione, who murdered Kelly Thomas on camera. I believe you and I were on. Was it that night? I was on Coast to Coast with you when that verdict came in, or was that Mark Dice? You and I think we were on for the 2012 one. I don't know.
Yeah, we were on for a different one.
Yeah, I forget. I thought it was that one, but no. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Zimmerman did go to trial, and in the course of the trial, you got the witness testimony, you got the forensic evidence. You go, okay, this guy was jumped. All right. Yeah. Anyway, so it is very different. But I mean, if it's self-defense, why do you have to stay in trial? If the evidence that you've gathered, it's like there's nothing to see here. Like, this guy got him and he defended himself and it's over. Why does that need to go to trial necessarily? I don't know that it always does.
I think there's a couple points there. Number one, if you're referring to my suggestions about the grand jury system.
Yeah, because I'm still thinking about it as we go.
You're a private person in your home. You are not an agent of the state. You are not a public servant. I didn't say get rid of the grand jury system. I said make it more adversarial. If you as a private person in your own home who don't work for the state and therefore are not considered a public servant, we used to literally consider that a public servant. You didn't get paid almost anything. So, but you are a public servant.
How far we've come with servants, and with 28 years of distinguished service, Harry Reid, service, my ass, you've enriched yourself off. Anyway,
what was it? Charlie Rangel and he was Democrat and a Republican senator, had like a combined 120 years in Congress.
Like Strom Thurmond, if we want to go back far enough, yeah.
Yes, Strom Thurmond. That's exactly who it was. It was Charlie Rangel and Strom Thurmond.
God almighty.
Jon Stewart did an entire segment about that on The Daily Show.
Yeah, how far we've come from true public servants. And John Adams, for all the bad stuff he did, and with the Alien and Sedition Act, I mean, he was one of the founding fathers of this country, and he understood you defend people that are indefensible, which is sometimes why I like the ACLU. I rarely do, but sometimes with civil liberties stuff. But that is how our system's based. If you don't defend the people that on the basis, like, no way would I want to defend Charles Manson or Jeffrey Dahmer or something. No way. Well, you have to. That's how our system works. And I get what you're saying, and especially looking at these statistics, it's hard to set aside.
Before you get what I'm saying, let me finish what I was saying.
Yeah.
I never said in any way, shape, or form we get rid of the grand jury system. All I'm saying is if you're a public servant, you have a different level of responsibility and a different level of accountability. If you're a private person, the grand jury will look over your evidence and decide whether or not you actually were in that, because the grand jury isn't predisposed to help you. But if you're an agent of the state and you go and even if you're in your own house, you chose to work for the state, and therefore you chose to be a public servant. In choosing to be a public servant, there are certain things that come with that. One of those, I would propose, is that your case goes to trial if you do something like that, because you are considered it would be considered a conflict of interest for the prosecutor to decide whether or not you're guilty. And I think that's a very important distinction that has to be made.
I'm going to have to really think this through. You and I are not going to be the only ones really breaking down the efficacy of the grand jury system. People are very upset right now across the country, and I don't think any of us in our lifetimes have heard the phrase grand jury more than we have in the past month, past week especially.
Right?
Absolutely. So, yeah, I think we're going to have some time in the next few months to get into that. But, I mean, on a broader scale, Dan, let's... Unless you had another big point you want to make on these two, I was just wondering if we could step back to see the forest for the trees for a second here, because, your organization, PANDA, with the National Defense Authorization Act and, the Boston bombings, you talk Boston Massacre, I'll talk Boston bombings, when the military and the police were just, no search warrants and rights were being suspended and damn near martial law we saw in Ferguson. I mean, there's a bigger issue here, and I know our buddy Ben Swanee's going to be doing a special on how is that one phrased? The root causes of police militarism or something. I forget exactly how it's phrased. But, I mean, this is something you went down to Ferguson, and you got to see like a dry run, a preseason game for the police militarized, the police militarization. Talk about that a little bit in general, because it really connects to what's happening on these local levels where all the police are protecting themselves, and it's just getting strange.
Well, on that note, I have a bit of a question for you.
Oh,
Because I've relayed my Ferguson experience several times, and most of what I experienced is on live stream. Anybody can go watch it. Do you want to discuss the roots of police militarization like we were on CNN or a mainstream media show, or do you want to really get at the root of police militarization? Like, all
I feel
the way
like you
down
said the
to
same thing
psychological
twice.
roots.
Okay. I like that band, The Roots. We booked them at Bowling Green. Now they're Jimmy Fallon's backup band. They're pretty good. Well, the root or the root? You want the truth, or do you want the truth? All right, give me both. Give me the CNN. Give me the drive-by media, the dinosaur media version of the roots, and then we'll dig in to find the real roots under the roots.
Okay. So, as you mentioned, I spent 2 weeks down in Ferguson, Missouri. This was back in August during the original issues down there. And I think one really important point that has to be made is you never would have heard the word Ferguson if the Ferguson Police Department hadn't responded to a funeral like they were raiding a drug house. And that is what sparked those protests. Those protests were not sparked because another young man was gunned down by an officer. The several people, I'd say up to about 75 people that I interviewed both on and off camera out there. One of the common themes was, are you shocked by this? Well, no. It happens all the time. Well, then what is it? It's the way the police responded. On Saturday night, when he was killed, there were no protests. There was a bit of a vigil. There were some people standing around mourning, and there were really frustrated people around the memorial. And the Ferguson Police Department is actually the first time I heard the word. Ferguson Police Department showed up in riot squads, several police dogs, and a few armored personnel carriers. That's not the way you respond to a funeral. It's the police equivalent of the Westboro Baptist Church showing up to protest a soldier's death. It doesn't matter what the guy was doing in his previous life. It doesn't matter what the circumstances are. You don't show up to a funeral in riot gear. In fact, you had the exact opposite experience with the most recent Ferguson protests. You're familiar with the Nashville police chief who sent the Secret Service a pretty stern letter telling them that they shouldn't try to fake a warrant because that wasn't going to be allowed in his jurisdiction?
When was this?
A couple months ago.
Now refresh me on that.
Nashville police chief had some officers go out with a few Secret Service agents to serve a search warrant on a guy who had been making supposedly threatening statements against the president. And the officers show up, and the guy refused to open his door and says, "Do you have a warrant?" And the officers look to the Secret Service agents, and they're like, well, just wave a piece of paper in front of the door. And
Wow.
the police officers decided not to do that and reported to their police chief what happened. He sent the Secret Service a very stern letter saying that you better not do that in my jurisdiction. So I have a lot of respect for him already, but the Ferguson protest, the most recent round of them, went up in his city in Nashville, and he decided they were going to start protesting at the police station. They were going to work their way onto the highway. He decided, instead of sending out riot gear, riot police, or militarized tanks, he was going to send out his officers in jogging uniforms with hot chocolate and marshmallows. And some people might consider that plan absurd, but what happened is they treated the protest like a parade. They kept an eye on it. They make sure it was protected from getting run over. And when the protesters decided they were going to march out on the highway, they told them not to, but when they were determined to anyway, the police officers walked out in front of them, blocked the highway, 35 minutes, protest was on the highway, protest got off. There was no vandalism, there was no burning. In fact, most highway blockages in most cities lasted 2 to 3 to even 5 hours. The protest blockage in Nashville lasted 35 minutes. The approach of respect that the Nashville police chief took toward the protesters, respecting their First Amendment rights, was a rather unique approach in today's world, and the exact opposite, both in result and in process, that the Ferguson Police Department took to the funeral of Michael Brown on the street. That was one of the first things I learned.
You're saying funeral, but it's the memorial. Having a memorial. Okay, because I keep thinking like they're in a cemetery and police are jumping over tombstones and lurking behind them with AKs or something, or ARs rather. Okay, all right, a memorial. They showed up with heavy-handed tactics and like, really? There's 100 of you? You know how many of us there are? All right, we're all coming out tomorrow. And that they escalated the situation is what you're saying.
And I want to kind of do the Reader's Digest version of the timeline here. So they escalate the situation there. The protests erupt. They start getting pretty serious the next day. So the Ferguson police chief, Tom Jackson, who is good friends with Chief Belmar of the St. Louis County Police, calls up the St. Louis County Police. And they show up to the protests with SWAT tactical units, not riot units. Riot units are armed so they're mostly in defense. Massive riot shields, the works. The St. Louis County Police showed up with tactical units who are armed for offense. They pointed their guns at daytime protests and arrested reporters and did several other fun things while they were out there. I get there about a week later after all this stuff had happened, and I am starting to get mingled among the protesters, and the protests are dying down. Like, people are thinking, okay, we got our message across. They know us. We can go back to work now. We can, and then it was actually a really festive atmosphere. They were serving food. I had great hot dogs, awesome cooking. Like, it was great. That was
let me tell you, Blake and I, who just left the program a little earlier, if you're just joining us here on Agree to Disagree, Blake and I are experiencing it when we went to the Bundy Ranch. You know, I mean, it was at a cattle. Man, I'll tell you what, they had the barbecue grills going. They had all this food out. It was like a huge family reunion. I mean, it was very hospitable. While they're pointing over at the mountain, saying, "See right up there? That's where they had a few snipers. See over on this range? That's where they had a few snipers. This is where the helicopters were coming by. This is where the car came through." And it's like, holy crap. Yeah, but yeah, the hospitality was very good on our side there. And you're saying it was the same for you down in Ferguson, yeah?
Exactly, and this is the night after the one Quick Trip had burnt down, or a couple nights after. So all dying down, real festive atmosphere. People aren't not upset anymore; they're just calm. And then that day, the governor decides to impose a curfew. At 3 p.m., he imposes the curfew. At 3 p.m., he holds the press conference saying at midnight the curfew is going in. Within an hour, the talks went from, glad you're here, good to see you, yeah, I know this person, yeah, we haven't been listened to, but things are dying down, to F the curfew. That was the one guiding factor after 3 p.m., F the curfew. And they brought that then upon themselves. Just before, and I said I was going to go in timeline, but I screwed myself up. Just before
Dan, this show's all over the place, as it always is. So don't you worry about going off kilter for just a moment. That's fine.
Okay. So just before this, the police had responded very heavy-handedly. This is about 3 days after the shooting. They responded very heavy-handedly. And then the state police move in. Everybody's like, what the heck? Like, this is ridiculous. So the governor calls in the state police. The state police move in, take control of the situation. Captain Ron Johnson, the guy who was, out there with the protesters, shaking their hands and jogging, and then sent the National Guard to bust them and sent SWAT teams in to tear gas them. That aside, Captain Johnson takes control of the situation. The first thing he decides to do is pull everybody out. So for the night after he took control, I want to say Thursday. So Friday, that day, that night, you do not, the Ferguson police, and I heard this from several residents, and St. Louis County, no one was responding to calls inside Ferguson. So if your store was broken into, if you had a heart attack, if we are not responding to calls inside Ferguson, ma'am, click. I heard that story from several residents. They called, they knew people who called 911 during that time. All the operator says, we're not accepting calls in Ferguson, click.
Wow.
That sends a very strong message to the community that you get one of two things. You either get a military response or we don't show up.
That's like the line from Good Will Hunting. I'm going to see if I can find that scene. Go ahead.
So you send this message to people in the community, and then the next day, when everybody's saying, or next couple of days, everybody's saying screw the curfew, they send out officers in, like, one would have a riot shield and the others wouldn't. They'd be in uniforms, and this is during the day, so all the media is paying attention, all the media is able to see it. During the day, they're walking around. They're not really talking to the protesters. They're not really interacting with them. They're just kind of there. They look like little turtles. There's like 6 officers at a time. They're walking like they have a shell around them. And instead of intermingling among the crowd or even talking to anybody. So we do this, and Ron Johnson gives his, oh yeah, we love peace, and I love peaceful protest, and we love you, media. And then at night, everything changes.
But let's pick it up with that night. I'm even writing that down so we actually stay on point for a second here. But this is, like you said, you have two choices. You can either have police militarization or we're going to ignore you. This is a famous scene from Good Will Hunting. I think it's very appropriate to jump in and tie in right here. Matt Damon, Robin Williams.
A lot of that stuff goes back a long way between me and him. Not about you.
In the middle of the movie.
That's your file. Send it back to the judge.
Now Robin Williams is looking pretty vulnerable. Damon's walking in. Hasn't really opened up too much.
You're not going to fail me, are you? What's it say? Want to read it? Why? Have you had any experience with that? 20 years of counseling. Yeah, I've seen some pretty awful shit. I mean, have you had any experience with that?
Looking at child abuse photos.
Personally. Yeah, I have. Sure ain't good. My father was an alcoholic. Mean fucking drunk. Come home hammered, looking to wail on somebody. So I'd provoke him, so he wouldn't go after my mother and little brother. Interesting nights were when he wore his rings. He used to just put a wrench, a stick, and a belt on the table.
Yeah, sorry for that. that first minute and a half there. This is not the condensed clip that I'm looking for, but yeah, this is finally what we're waiting to get up to, where his father would come home and put a couple things on a table and make him pick a choice.
Put a wrench, a stick, and a belt on the table. Just
Wrench,
shoes.
stick, belt.
Well, I gotta go with the belt there, Van.
I used to go with the wrench.
Why the wrench?
Just fuck him. That's why.
Your foster father.
And there you have it. Sorry, I mean, really, with the producer and a little bit more heads up, I would have trimmed that down to just that part. Or, pick the belt. No, I'm gonna pick the wrench. Why? Just fuck him. And that's kind of what you're saying is they're given the choice. All right, you want a military response, or you want us to just ignore you? How about fuck you? How about we're just gonna show up, and and then to what that looks like to the mainstream media and the rest of the country, it's like, oh, these idiots are just burning their own city down. But it was weird because it's like their city became occupied, but it was only occupied after. Yeah, I mean, it's almost like, how do you stop the cycle of violence at that point? You look at Israel, you look at Palestine, you look at places on this globe that are always fighting with each other. How do you stop the cycle of violence? How do you do it?
How do you stop the cycle of violence? You stop praising the people who initiate it. And
but they were praising Mike Brown for some reason.
I'm not saying you're praising the police response to the protests.
Oh no! I was backing it up to Mike Brown as the one that initiated violence. He was clearly the one that initiated violence in the liquor store, and he's clearly the one that initiated violence.
Well, I've been away from that for a while, and let's stay away from that. That was a single individual. I'm talking about the protests here.
Oh, okay, we can do that.
I spoke to a young man. We were, in fact, their cell tower sucked, so I lost about 5 hours of some of the best live stream video I had up there. Learned my lesson. It was my first time live streaming.
Always back up, right?
Yeah, it's one of those things that I really wish I had that, but I have the experience, I have the memory.
Fair.
And one of the men I talked to, because I was really well liked by the protesters most of the time. There was some Nation of Islam didn't really care for me much. I was white, so there was that segment didn't really care for me, but yeah. Those who could see past it, and I'd say about 90%, 95% of the people were seeing past that. I spoke to several people, and I eventually got to speaking to a young man. He had a mask around his face and a flower in his hand. And a rose in his hand. I asked him, well, aren't those kind of contradictory? Why do you have a mask on your face and a flower in your hand? And he said, I want peace. I'm like, you want peace? He said, I want peace. But if the police want war, he pulls his mask up back over his face. We're prepared for war. And it's the same. I talked about this in a couple other shows. People will say, oh, well, it was the individual's fault for burning down their city this last time. Agreed. People will say that it was society's fault for bringing them up that way. Agreed. People will say that it was the state's fault for starting the violence. Agreed. It was not one facet. But one of the big facets, one of the facets I can't change is their individual actions. One of the facets I can is I can do my best to teach people and work with people and teach people to get off the couch and change the state part of it. That is the reason Ferguson burned. Ferguson didn't burn because of Mike Brown. Didn't burn because a white police officer shot a black man. It burned because the people who burned, and I'm not talking looting. Looters are a separate thing. The looters weren't really burning things. They were getting their stuff and they were using the cover of a protest to steal things. But the people who burn those buildings, they bear individual responsibility for their actions. I can't change that. What I can is people in power know. Anybody who's ever studied any history knows that when people, whether it is or not, when people perceive that the political system no longer will help them, and in fact, it is there to oppress them. And then thirdly, that there's nothing they can do about it. You already had those two elements in Ferguson. You already had those two elements of oppression. You look at, there's an article in the Washington Post by Radley Belko. It's called How St. Louis Profits from Poverty. There are towns near St. Louis, including Jennings, and little other, like St. Anne, a few other towns, that have 800 people, 1,000 people, 1,500 people, and they have $8 million city halls and $4 million police departments. Why? Because they write enough traffic tickets to pay for it. And they have a court system. I spoke to people down there who had been in cages in the municipal court system while they were testifying in court. I've spoken to people who were bounced from municipal court to municipal court. Municipal court has actually been told by the higher court of Missouri that they were absolutely corrupt, and then they went, well, you don't have the power of the purse to enforce that, so sucks to be you. So you have the element of oppression. You have the element of perceived repression, and then you have the feeling that you can do nothing about it. And when people accomplish those three, when people reach the point of those three, we have the American Revolution, we have the Bosnian Revolution, we have the Bolshevik Revolution, we have every outbreak of mass political violence in history has resulted from that final bar, and that is they believe there is nothing else they can do about it. And that is why 12 buildings. I'm surprised it was only 12, but that's why 12 buildings in Ferguson burned.
Are you surprised?
They received. Go ahead.
No, because they received what?
They perceived.
Oh, perceived.
And I would say in certain areas they were right, but they perceived there was nothing more that could be done politically, and they had no other option.
Now, that being the case, after what we saw when the killing happened, a few days before the grand jury made their announcement, the National Guard was activated. Don't you find it weird, Dan, that they weren't just protecting the local businesses and buildings based on the previous experience they had? Not to be out in front, just to be there, back and protecting buildings from this type of thing happening. I mean, wasn't that surprising to you? Or do you think that they were told to stand down? Just like you said, I think there's a difference between showing up to a memorial and you know, swinging in like stormtroopers, you know, and having your big weapons and having your National Guard. You know, this is a place that burned not too long ago. It ain't going to happen again. All these buildings are protected back here. They're not confrontational, but stay away and protest. You know, I mean, your thoughts on the National Guard being used at all?
It shouldn't have just been the National Guard that did that. It should have been everyone. The police should have been relegated to one thing and one thing only: protect property, protect life. And they should have been in front of those businesses.
And they weren't.
And they weren't. And there's a lesson to be had there. And it's the lesson, regardless of if it's a lesson they wanted to teach them or not. There's a couple things about the National Guard being activated and then standing down. Number one, the poor communities in America aren't as information deaf as they once were. And government kind of realizes things pretty slow. So, you know, the poor communities may have been information deaf when we used syphilis to infect a bunch of Indians. But they're not lost in the information gap anymore. And when you activate the National Guard, you had, I'm not sure if you know this, but in the 7 days after Michael Brown was killed, there's an average in St. Louis of one black-on-black murder per day. In the 7 days after Michael Brown was killed, there was not one. And someone who had been very involved with the Bloods in St. Louis, who became a good acquaintance of mine when I was down there, told me that it was because the gangs decided that they had a mutual enemy. And it wasn't each other. when you, knowing that situation, activate an army, the message you send is, are you tough enough? And if you send that message to a bunch of young men, I'm a young man. You step up and say what you're going to do about it, partner. That's not a, oh yeah, I'm totally not going to do anything about it. I'm actually going to sit in my chair. There's a reaction to that that's predictable. And so when you activate the National Guard 3-4 days before it happens, you send a message, we're ready to fight.
But weren't most of the people that were lighting things on fire and shooting at police officers, because that was what happened the night the Ferguson burned, they were sending fire department officials in, and they were getting shot at, and they said, back up, don't you dare, they're setting traps to shoot firemen. That is garbage. But I mean, out of the people protesting, most of them were good people. I'm asking that as a question. I'm not stating that. But on my last show with Blake, I said I was at Woodstock in 1999, and we had 600,000 people there. Rage Against the Machine, Metallica, every night. It was just an insane 3 days. And then when Red Hot Chili Peppers were playing, this peace group passed out a bunch of candles, and sure enough, people started lighting things on fire and ripping down parts of the wall and lighting it on fire. And it wasn't everybody. It was a small portion of people. But when it was left to sit out there and nobody was addressing those first 5-10 idiots that were doing it, a lot of other people did it, and it made it really dangerous for everybody. So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, you're saying that if they wouldn't have stepped up and said, all right, are you strong enough to handle this? I challenge you to a duel, good sir. I kind of look at it the other way. Like, just grab the couple hundred idiots that want to, throw projectiles and shoot weapons and burn buildings, arrest them, the people that are trying to break down windows and stuff, arrest them real quick. The rest of the people are going to get in line and not do it. You're saying it's exact opposite.
I'm saying that, first of all, to address, was it the majority of protesters? No. But, and in fact, a good friend of mine, very close, Justin King, he's a journalist for the Anti-Media. He was actually in Ferguson on that night and wrote an article. I think it was Battle of Ferguson 2. And he talked about how the riots began, the actual burning. And he said nothing was burnt until the police started firing tear gas and rubber bullets in the crowd, particularly at a woman who was having a heart attack. I'm not saying that the majority of the protesters were involved in this. No. But what I am saying is there's a really good chance, based on the mild response from the protesters that we saw, because only 12 buildings burnt, and there was, the one loss of life was not related to just random riotous violence by any, it looks like it was deliberate murder. So we have one injury and we have 12 buildings burnt. Compare that to any other mass riot in U.S. history. It just pales in comparison. Compare that to Pumpkin Fest in New Hampshire this year, where a bunch of college kids got together and rioted over pumpkins and people got hurt.
Hey, don't mess with my pumpkin, dude. Come on, I'm from Ohio. Don't you dare. I love this time of year. And leave me one of the Snickers, not one of those little fun-size ones. Give me a big Snickers. I haven't heard of Pumpkin Fest, but there were college kids and they rioted, you're saying?
It was Keene, New Hampshire. And people got hurt quite a bit. And so you have, there wasn't more property damage in Keene, New Hampshire. There also wasn't as big of a police response. But Keene, New Hampshire, there was riot, and as far as damage to life, it was actually worse and more dangerous there than latest Ferguson was. So let's put this in context, first of all. But secondly, it's very important to note that though it was a very small minority of the protesters involved in burning buildings, that was a minority that the state could have avoided by just respecting their right to protest. I was in D.C. on November 5th with a bunch of Anons. Anons aren't exactly known for being laid-back protesters.
Yeah, and that's remember the 5th of November, I believe.
Exactly. Remember the 5th of November, Guy Fawkes Day. So the commemorative march. There's about 300-400 of us there. Anons aren't known to be the most peaceful protesters. Just not. Like, if you look up, you can see, especially in the UK, it just gets bad. So what the police decided to do when we were down there is all except for Homeland Security, but Capitol Police, Parks Police, pretty much all of the DC police, what they decided they were going to do is they were going to stay as non-confrontational as possible. They were going to block off roads for us temporarily as we walked by. They were going to keep an eye on property, but besides that, ignore pretty much everything. And in fact, there was a fight. You can look at this online. There was a fight between about 5 or 6 Anons and 3 or 4 Capitol policemen over a barricade. They had actually barricaded off the grounds around the U.S. Capitol, which I'm sure is unconstitutional as all get out. But they barricaded them off, and some Anons didn't care for that much, so they were pulling the barricade. They were literally this tug-of-war happening between 4 Capitol Police and 5 Anons, yanking back and forth on a barricade. This happens for like 30 seconds or so. I have never seen this before in my life. When there's a fight over a barricade, police get an order from behind them, and you see all at once they just go, let go. And the barricade falls, Anons take the barricade, but that ended the confrontation. The only people who got a whole lot of hell from the protesters were Homeland Security when they decided to waltz up and tase somebody because they didn't care for the fact he was carrying pepper spray on his jacket. And they also wanted to take his flag and take his backpack and take a few other things. He had a Gadsden flag, and they wanted him to give that up. And it was an interesting scenario, which I caught on video. You can see it at my live stream channel, ustream.tv, Feelin' So Fly. But the point I'm making is all of the evidence I've ever seen shows that the protesters down there, a lot of them understood what their image meant, understood who they had to speak to. And it took a couple days in Ferguson, but they realized they had to self-police. That's why there was a bit of looting at the very beginning, because Ferguson protesters just figured you're going to go out and protest. Well, they didn't realize people were going to use it as cover. They learned quickly. They set up their own watchdog groups. But based on all the evidence I've ever seen, the correct response from police when faced with a protest that could turn violent is to either show up in front of a store or property with nothing but your standard uniform and be friendly with, and send several officers to be friendly with protesters, or not show up at all. And in either case, what I've seen lately, what I saw in Ferguson, it leads to just a much better understanding and a much better outcome for property and life involved.
Let me step back even a little further now. As we've done once before, let's go again. Let's go to the global game of risk. Let's look at the IMF and the Federal Reserve and the military-industrial complex and the New World Order and the global prison planet, if you will. In the larger scale analysis of what's going on this planet, whether it's natural resources, whether it's constant warfare, whether it's, well, that's plenty to start with. I can wrap it there. What do you see happening on a global scale? Is America just a pawn in this game, or probably a king or a queen in this game, let's be honest, but are we just a player on this global chessboard, and it's all happening so weird and so violent now because there's a much bigger plan in action, Dan? Do you go that far?
I'm going to take this in a bit of a different direction, but I'm going to answer your question. all your listeners, raise your hand if you know someone who's been killed by a corporation.
Wait, hold on. Do I need to raise my by a corporation?
By a corporation, by agents of a corporation.
Man, there's so much cancer, and I don't know if I can
No,
directly.
direct, straight up murder.
I mean, Monsanto dumping, or a chemical company spills, and then everybody dies afterward, or Chernobyl, there were direct deaths.
Let me limit to the categories that statisticians usually track as far as direct murder.
Oh, okay.
And that is causing famine, war, or straight up murder. Either way. So, anyone you know who has directly died as a result of a famine caused by a corporation, a war caused by a corporation, or run by a corporation, or straight up murdered by agents or people working for a corporation. On behalf of that corporation, I should add, not just they happen to be working there. There's a point I'm trying to make there. And the point is actually even broader because corporations are a fiction of the state. And a corporation is actually a veil protecting you from responsibility. So even when they're less responsible, and even when we live in basically a corporatist society, most people can't point out to me a war started, run, managed by a corporation, or a famine started, run, managed by a corporation. Yet last century, over 208 million people died of democide, or death by the state, death by government. And that is only including collateral damage from war, and famine. 208 million. So if we're going to look at what the larger plan is in place, we're going to look at what does this chessboard look like? It's a chessboard between the purveyors and the supporters, excuse me, of the most destructive entity of all time, and the entity responsible for more murders than anything else. People will say, well, I'll often compare slavery to taxes, or taxes to slavery. They say, well, you could never compare the two. I say, okay, well, you're right. Slavery never funded wars. Taxes did. Taxes have indirectly, pretty much directly, led to the death of 208 million people through the state. And so, if we're going to look at the global chessboard, and we're going to be anything more than a CNN or a Fox, and we're going to look at the root of the issue. It's not a game between Russia and China and the United States. It's not a game with Iran. It's not a game with Israel. It is a game in which, or a war, in which those purveyors of this tyrannical entity and the supporters of the tyrannical entity versus those who do not want or who want less of this tyrannical entity. That's the chess game. Because whether Russia or China or the United States ends up being the world superpower, whether Iran ends up getting a nuclear weapon, or whether Israel ends up being the superpower, it doesn't really matter. Because all of them are on the same team. And that team is oppression. That team is tyranny. And that team is theft, murder, and destruction. So if we're going to look at the global game, we're going to see, well, where is it? The teams are tyranny and force versus liberty. The question is, what side are you on? And the question is, in which areas are what sides winning?
Oppression, tyranny, confiscation. The state isn't. Where do I go with that one?
Well, let's take it to police. I made a rather bold statement earlier.
You've made a few. I've made a few in my life as well. It's okay.
If we're going to fix the problem, we're going to have to get rid of security forces who steal from your pockets. If we're going to actually fix the problem, because there may be a part of it that is increasing militarization and increasing destruction of the police, there's also a part of it that just wasn't caught on camera before. And we're just now knowing about it. We're just now finding it out. The New Orleans Police Department arrested 86 of their officers last year, or this year, rather, and called it an improvement that they were finally arresting their officers. It's been going on a while down there.
That's a lot. That's a lot.
That's a lot to call an improvement. That 86 of your officers were arrested.
I wonder how
Congratulations.
I wonder if we know how many or what percentage that was. But that's a large number. That's a large number of firings. That's a lot of people, like, fired with cause, fired because just, I don't know. That's
there are several reasons. I won't necessarily get into.
Yeah, and I'm sure case by case, but
it's not a case by case. But I'm using it as an example. The point is, we have suffered, and there are some people who say, well, we have suffered from a lack, or we're losing our morals in society. I would say that we've suffered from a lack of morals in society for a very long time. And we still have even debates. Some days it astonishes me we even have debates about this. We still have debates of whether this person could use force on another person without their consent, and whether that's okay if it's very clear that person's not consenting and this person wants them to do it for just an arbitrary reason. We still, for some reason, have those debates. But I ask people, when you think of a good cop, what action are you thinking of them taking? All the viral stories I've seen of good cops, some of them are cops taking a mother and her child to the store to get that child a car seat because he was a caring cop. Some stories are they're taking dinners to families, or they're feeding the homeless, or they're giving homeless men boots, or they're...
Yeah, the New York guy with the boots, and maybe that was
Right.
a fire department or a police, whichever one. And then I saw one the other day, I think it was local police. They were, they all brought over a Christmas tree and like decorations and maybe a couple presents to a family that they knew and that needed it. And those are good cops. I like that stuff.
Right. So and I've even seen instances where good cop is a cop who sees a family being assaulted and stops the burglar, or stops the mugger, stops the murderer. Either seeing something happen in front of them, or solving a huge crime, or defending themselves, or doing things like you said, just bring a Christmas tree to people who need it. And what I find interesting is we call someone a good cop, and we point them, there's a good cop. There's an example of a good cop. Only when they're not using the immunities that being a cop gives you. We call someone a good cop when they fire in self-defense. Well, you don't have to be a cop to fire in self-defense.
Well, yeah, you do. There are a lot of places that try to limit your Second Amendment rights.
Let me talk about rights and not some fancy opinion written down on paper. You don't have to be a cop to defend somebody who's currently in danger. You don't have to be a cop to drop a Christmas tree at somebody's house. You don't have to be a cop to give a homeless man boots or feed the homeless. You don't have to be a cop to educate kids on why they should be safe. When we see pictures of a good cop, what we see is someone who happens to be wearing a police uniform. You could solve crimes without being a cop. Yeah, they do it all the time. Crime Stoppers, Crime Watch.
Batman wasn't a cop.
Batman wasn't a cop. There you go. But the point is, so the people we think of good cops are people who are good without being cops.
So we just have good people, and if we had,
we just have good people who happen to be cops. And if we understood that when we think of a good cop, we think of a good person who also happens to be a cop, we realize how absurd it is that we should have a police department that relies on stealing money from people, aka taxes, in order to exist, and then that they should have the immunities that we give police officers, such as not being able to be sued personally.
I'll tell you what. There've been a lot of I get some of that. I really do. I'm digging a big part of that. I will say though, there are a lot of things that have occurred around the neighborhood that I wouldn't want to go be a part of. I don't mind paying a little bit to have a company take care of that. I don't want to work in sewage and sanitation.
That's the point. Is you would get better service, and you would have less rights violated if you simply chose your own security.
Very interesting, because I do have security. We have a security company that patrols 25 buildings, 216 units. They're only a phone call away all the time. They're in addition to the LAPD. Yeah, that's
for now.
For now. Interesting. This is something like I could see you and Mark Claire on Lions of Liberty really going down the libertarian sinkhole with this one. It's interesting.
It's important to recognize, because if we're going to create a better society, a free society, people will tell me that, well, I want limited government. I would like limited government. And so we may not agree on a lot of things, but we agree on the end goal. And I said, no, we don't agree on the end goal. We may be taking the same path to the end goal. We don't agree on the end goal. The end goal for me, the end goal for people who really understand liberty, in my opinion, is the eradication of the guarantee that your rights will be violated. There's one thing that your rights might be violated. We can't prevent that. We can do our best. But the guarantee and the support of an institution that flat out guarantees that someone's rights will be violated. If we're going to have a free society, we've got to start with the morals. We've got to start with being morally consistent. And the way we do that is we stop supporting the entity, the state, government, that guarantees with each of its actions that rights will be violated. That we know you put government in this formula, it will equal rights violations. We don't know if you put no government in this formula. Well, it might equal rights violations. It might have a little bit of chaos for a while, or even for a long while. But what we do know is that government inherently, as it's funded through theft, violates people's rights, and that no entity has the murder record of the state even close.
I like private security. I'm a big fan of it. I'm a big fan. It's like supplemental insurance. It's not...
Why wouldn't you? I've never heard somebody go, I'm going to buy a hammer. And, I hate the fact that Home Depot, Ace, and Lowe's all carry hammers. Why do they all carry hammers? I wish Home Depot had a monopoly on hammers. We don't do that. So why on earth would we go, you know what? I like being protected. So I hope that one entity and only one entity has a monopoly on actually protecting me. What sense does that make? We know how bad monopolies are. Even people who want bigger government usually want it to stop corporate monopolies. So we know how bad monopolies are. Why is it that we've not logicked ourselves into maybe it's bad for the police to have a monopoly on security?
I don't like monopolies at all, and that's what they're trying to do with the internet. Without the internet, Dan, I'll tell you what, that is a game changer back to the Stone Age as far as we're concerned. And they have that power, Dan. And that's where this gets real dangerous if you really wanted to mess with people. And you've seen, Iran, you've seen Egypt, you've seen Syria, you've seen, You've seen it all over the globe, and it hasn't even started yet. These Occupy, these Ferguson, the hands up, don't shoot. You see it all over the place. The Green Uprising. We have an incredible tool known as the internet. But you see all the legislation that's been written pretty much nonstop for the past decade after 9/11. It's been moving steadily in the way where there could be an internet kill switch, where in the NDAA, as you're well aware, you could be disappeared without charge or trial. Completely unconstitutional stuff. Oh, they're just going to data mine. Edward Snowden said the NSA is just going to illegally obtain information, violating our Fourth Amendment rights against illegal search and unreasonable search and seizure. I see that there could be a key or a switch to flip at some point for a really bad person that takes power to do some really bad things all across this world. Is that something that bothers you? Is that something you think about? Or do you see a workaround in case? Or do you really not see that as an option?
I'll answer that in two ways. The first, I dislike the terminology really bad. I think that if we're going to have morals, we can't have morals that are what's known as relative morality. We can't walk into a situation and go, I'm going to do this, and then walk into a different situation and go, I'm going to do this instead. We have to have morals that hold up by situation, or we're just going through life without any. So we're going to have consistency. And if we're going to decide what makes a person bad, I really like John Locke's theory of life, liberty, and property. Because if you're going to have perfect opposites, you can only have two. If you wouldn't even know, in fact, if light existed if there was no dark. You wouldn't know if solid existed if there was no soft. You have to have its opposite. But you can have no more than two, because once you introduce gray into black and white, then anything could be a combination of gray, black, or white. In order to have a right and wrong, you have to have perfect opposites. Well, he sets out some very good perfect opposites. He sets out life and property. Every physical object is going to be one of the two. It's going to be life or it's going to be property. One of the two. They are perfect opposites. It cannot be part life because life is the opposite of property. And then he sets out liberty and force. Liberty is the opposite of force, and vice versa. So if we're going to lay out a moral system, it has to have perfect opposites. And somebody might be able to show me a better system than that, but I think that works pretty well. And it jives with the human condition and human spirit, too, of what we consider to be violence. In fact, I was on a radio show in Loma Linda, California, not that long ago. And there was a veteran there, and I challenged him to defend preemptive torture. And he used terminologies like, well, in order to protect my men, and I don't know what might happen to my men, so I have to defend them. And I called him out, and I found it interesting that he used defensive language to defend an offensive action. And it really points to the human spirit, which is we really don't like people who aggress on others, who are the aggressor. So we're going to stick with that as our moral basis. Well, what makes someone really bad, and what makes someone bad? If we're going to have a bad and we're going to have a good, let's say it's liberty and force. What makes someone bad is using force.
Like wasteful congressional spending, or
like congressional spending. It's not their money.
Reallocation through force. Yeah, okay.
Reallocation through force, any type of force. If there's no agreement there, it's force. So what we have to do is we have to say, look, where is our line of bad? Where are the bad people? And if we're going to define our morality and pick a line that's bad, I would argue the line should be force. So there is no really bad. There's just wrong, right, bad, and good. There may be better than others, because you may have used force more times. But there are really bad people. There are bad people in all levels of the state, everywhere in the world. It's not as if one day the bad people's plan is going to be fulfilled, and all of a sudden they'll be able to start violating rights. Do you pay taxes? Do you pay a weird amount, or do you pay the amount on the paper? Why do you pay the amount on the paper? Because they're going to put you in a cage if you don't. Those are bad people. So it isn't a matter of the bad people's plan finally being fulfilled. You're in it right now. Pay attention. And secondly, on the other hand, there's a map on the Skeptical Libertarian, which I really like because I enjoy data and facts, and I like to try to bring them in above an emotional response to things. And there's an article called Gays, Guns, and Ganja. It is a series of 3 maps, GIFs, showing how America and the states around the country are becoming more and more liberty-oriented in 3 areas, gays, guns, and ganja. How states have gone, even with a massive movement to try to get gun control, how states have gone from may issue to shall issue on concealed carry. How states have gone from banning gay marriage outright. I mean, heck, Massachusetts, nobody follows it anymore, but Massachusetts in their statute still bans fornication. It is a $30 fine or 3 months in prison.
Fornication.
That is defined as sex before marriage.
For fornication.
Fornication. It is in Massachusetts' official state statutes, has not been repealed. I found it when I was digging through a bunch of state statutes trying to find citizens' arrest laws.
Well, look, you say you like facts, and I brought this up earlier. I want to play it for you. The number is 4T.
Mr. Simpson, how do you respond to the charge that petty vandalism, such as graffiti, is down 80%, while heavy sack beatings are up a shocking 900%?
Oh, people can come up with statistics to prove anything, Kent. 40% of all people know that.
I see.
I see. Anyway, I couldn't resist it this time. Yeah, so there's statistics everywhere, and
that argument is like if I have one very key phrase that cuts off a debate, and I've only ever heard it like 3 or 4 times.
Man, I'm not gonna make like any of the 300 jokes I just thought of. Tweet us at American_media_ the things you would say to cut off a debate. Okay, go ahead.
But that is very simple. I don't really like science. I don't think science is the way to solve things. You used science to come up with that because you determined what was the good thing to say at that moment. You determined, based on your value system, what science was, what that looked like. You used science to tell me that science doesn't work. Stop it. Okay, I don't go any further. It's not worth my time. I could literally chew my teeth on a brick and have spent my time better than debating that person.
There are some people that it's not even worth agreeing to disagree. It's just important to move along and forget you ever had that brief encounter with that piece of humanity. Nah, I'm good. You'll drag me down to stupid and beat me with experience. You know, I'm not coming down to your level here. No thanks. Yeah, I ran into like 8 of them yesterday, and I just sat there slack-jawed looking at them like, holy Lord, the things I would say or do to you, all of you. Yeah, you know what? I'm going to back my vehicle around and go the exact opposite direction, and I hope we never run into each other again. That's probably the best thing that could happen here. That happened yesterday, by the way, but anyhow, go ahead.
But yeah, so on that statistics point, but it lays out how liberty's winning, and I think it really is. And I think if you look at any of the nations throughout history who militarized their police, this isn't the first time it's happened, by the way. Any of the nations throughout history who militarized their police, there was no uprising against it. Nazi Germany, they didn't know about it. In fact, several Jews wouldn't believe when Jews would go town to town. They're coming. Ah, no, definitely not. Like, you did not have a resistance like this. You did not have an uprising like this. You did not have an anger like this. You didn't have the transparency we have. That's one of the things the state has always sucked at, is the reason they have to shut down media, they have to shut down the internet, they have to control the media through the state, is because they suck at propaganda. They have absolutely forever sucked at it. That's why they always have to close things down. So when it comes to the internet, that is, Tim Berners-Lee is one of the few people on the earth I would ever just go up to shake his hand, and that's it. The internet and transparency that it has brought has really facilitated a lot of this. But the fact remains, we are now thinking. There are vast majorities of people in the United States thinking about the militarization of our police. There are people in the United States thinking about currencies that are not controlled centrally. There are people in the United States thinking about the evils of too much taxes. Like, this doesn't happen in a country that's headed off the brink of tyranny usually. So what I see not just a local awakening, but a global awakening to the dangers of the state. And it's only taken us several hundred years. So we're getting there. And 200 or 300 years from now, we will probably see a huge shift. Maybe even 100 years from now. You can't really predict the time, but the power balance has already shifted. And now it's just a matter of how long will it take before the state ushers in its own demise, because it can't hold up for very long under the lens of scrutiny.
Yeah, I could see that. And part of the lens of scrutiny comes from media, it comes from activists, it comes from people that, like you said, you don't need to wear a police officer uniform to be a good person. You just be a good person and do a good thing. You hear about people, shootings and stabbings being stopped all the time from people that are concealed carry permit holders, and they happen to be in the right place at the right time, and they've had the right training to stop a horrible situation from becoming worse as a first responder, which is essentially what was militia, and that's been turned into a dirty word somehow, not to me, but that was any able-bodied person over 18 years of age or whatever the specifics were. That was just, hey, everybody, let's all look out for each other. We're all everybody's private security. But, it takes organization to make that happen. It takes mentors. It takes training. It takes leadership skills. It takes organization. It takes technological know-how. It takes marketing and sales. And it takes a lot of things working together so that we can be as efficient, advanced, and effective with way fewer dollars than the federal governments and the corporations that are out there. So I want you to talk a little bit now as we wrap things up, because we could pretty much talk for probably another 10 hours, and I think it would be compelling enough that people would listen. However, I want you to talk about the project, again, that we started the show off with, Solutions Institute. Full disclosure, I am working with Dan as we define exactly how and who and what, and strategize really business plans of how do we help each other. And that's really what, at Christmas time and Thanksgiving, whether you're able to give a little bit back, whether it's time, money, a good deed, go out of your way to do something nice for people. We're trying to give back and help the people around us. That's what Thanksgiving and Christmas is supposed to be about. And that's essentially what Solutions Institute is about, as far as my understanding, as I've been talking with Dan over, I've known Dan for years, but this particular project for several months. It really is about connecting like-minded people together to try to help each other out and look out after one another and help all of us succeed, the rising tide raising all boats. So, how does something like SI play in to this change that you're talking about, this way that we're one step ahead and we're confronting it with information and organization so that bad things don't just happen, like you said, in Nazi Germany? How does SI fit into all of this?
Well, SI was out of, I had the idea in my head before, but it really came to the forefront with an article I sat down to write and ended up working on it 3 months, called "Is It Time for a Violent Revolution?" I don't really care for provocative titles, by the way. I think they're clickbait.
Yeah, well,
but
you gotta be careful of the titles when they're way too much of a clickbait. If you get burned once by a place, you always look at it suspiciously the second time around. You're like, oh yeah, I'm sure this is the most outrageous video I'll ever see. That last one was stupid. No thanks. So I mean that's the currency
and
is honesty.
Clickbait has to bring you to something that's nowhere near worth the title. And I do hate clickbait, and this is why I spent 3 months on the article. But it's about a 20-minute read, and it lays out 5 points as to why a violent revolution is the wrong thing to do. And I went into this on the fence. I went into this not really sure, but knowing that this topic was happening, the conversation was happening in the bedrooms, the conversation was happening in the bar rooms, the conversation was happening over the phone. It was happening in people's private lives. That's where it was happening. It wasn't happening in the open. And it needed to. And because once you cross that bridge, you can't go back, ever. Like, you can't just go, we're going to turn off the violent revolution for like 3 days and stop. That doesn't happen. So one of the points, though, is that you cannot participate in a violent revolution because then you are nothing better than your oppressors. There's no difference between you and them. It is a sector that is considered a group of people who's considered to use violence against people who never harmed them directly, and it's considered legitimate for them to do so. That describes a government, and that describes a revolution. And it was coming out of that realizing that's never going to work. That's never going to be, it's not even a last resort. It's just no resort. You don't want to become the people you're fighting. So there had to be another way, and one of the things the activist community has needed for a long time, I know I needed it when I stepped up, is we have a lot of people out there who want to do something so bad, they see something wrong, they want to change it, but they don't know how. And politics and legalese, they make it so complicated that most people don't even want to bother with it. Heck, my generation practically doesn't even vote. So SI was formed to be the first ever activist consulting firm. Our goal isn't to take over projects. Our goal isn't to create AstroTurf. Our goal is to fill in where people need help and to help people turn ideas into action, to help people turn a thought, a want, a need to change something in their community into actual change in their community. We put together a website with tools and resources, information. There are just shy of 30 advisors in areas from media production to, in your case, event production. I've done grassroots organizing, all kinds of information at the Solutions Institute website. But actually, since it's your show, Brian, and you are an advisor for the Solutions Institute, what did you see in it?
What do I see in it?
What do you see in it? Why would you be a part of it?
Well, I could say in short order, I know people like you and John B. Wells, formerly of Coast to Coast, now running Caravan to Midnight. And I know the type of work you guys do. I know the track record you guys have out there. And Blake, for the listeners, Blake, who was in the earlier part of this program, came out to Los Angeles, and Dan was out here. Dan, was that the second time I met you in person for United We Stand Festival? It might have been the first time, but no, I think it was the second time. But when you look around and you see people like Ben Swan and Abby Martin in Immortal Technique, Dan Johnson with Panda, Blake with Eccentric Perspective, Brian with the New American Media, Go down the list of really amber lion of interesting people that are there that have been inside of this machine from different areas, and they're all kind of approaching it with, like Luke Rudowski. I think more networking from people that are really hustling. I think that's a really good idea, to get more networking from people that are hustling. And so all of us can step our game up a little bit more. So all of us, when it's time to send a message out, we can all borrow each other's platforms and really help multiply a message. It's not impossible. We can become our own network, and that's essentially what the New American Media is. This is your channel if I pre-approve that you're awesome enough. And I've been running a 3.5-year beta test over here, still figuring out exactly how we're going to do this as we try a few different things, and 400,000 video views later on our YouTube channel, and that's a nice little number. A couple people have stopped by to say hello. The thousands of subscribers, and tens of thousands on Twitter, and the hundreds on Facebook, and all that jazz. The community and the network and the ability to get information out, get something going. I need 50 people at the courthouse stairs with signs that say this, and you're not going to block traffic or light anything on fire, but this message needs to go everywhere. We need to get this information out. Go. We're the biggest network. There's no NBC or CBS. Guys, you'll keep creating awesome content and you'll make money for it. That's cool. But as far as us taking our marching orders from you guys, that's done. We're not going to return to that. So as we find another gathering of people that really just want this planet to be a little cooler, just a little less violent, a little more free, a little more fun. More you talk to people right now, more people that I know are essentially running paycheck to paycheck, frazzled and frustrated, worried about things, whether it's the global economy, whether it's an encroaching police state, whether it's something with their family or friends or their job, or their health. Everybody is slaying demons on a daily basis. Everybody. And it makes it a lot easier when you don't have a few $100,000 to really pay people to do the stuff you need done, and you got to find a way to do it on your own. You need a team. You need a team of people to rise up and help each other. If you ever seen when someone, I don't know, if a car or a race car flips over and lands in the stands, you'll see 10, 20 people run over to the car and flip it the other direction to help the person underneath. So when any of us have a car to be moved, it's real easy when you have 40 hands, pushing in your direction. And I think that takes a huge weight and burden off of the shoulders of people, Dan, that know something's wrong. They want to participate. They want to get going. But Lord, you know how hard it is to run Panda. I know how hard it is to run the New American Media. This stuff is a full-time gig beyond the hours that we have and the time that we have. And that's why I wanted to join Solutions Institute. One, because you have a strong track record. I know you, and I trust your intentions, whether I agree with every opinion or strategy that you're going to come up with. Come on, nobody's going to be 100% with anyone on this planet, so deal with it. If we're 60% of the time, we got a great place to start, and we're closer to 85%, if not higher than that. So, based on your track record, Dan, and based on knowing that we can move vehicles, we can move mountains if we all work together. That's why I was interested in what you had going on with Solutions Institute, and I'm excited to see how things begin. How do you envision SI beginning?
That there will not be a single activist who wants to see a better world, who's paying attention to world events, paying attention to what's going on in the first month of January, who will have not, at least through hearsay, heard of the Solutions Institute. We intend to launch big. I'm talking, we think that this idea is something that people need. and it's something that is providing value to activists, is providing value to people who really want to see a better world. What the heck is it when a team has a playbook, but an activist, or a team has a coach, but an activist can barely get a playbook? It's ridiculous. So there's a need for this, and I think that if we can provide a really good service, a really good value to people, that people will see the effectiveness of that, and they'll tell their fellow activists. And the bad people who really want to more than their sphere of control increase will always be a threat, because people are working together, strengths, instead of one guy, half his strengths, half his weak at night, hoping it works.
Yeah. It's a lot, man. It's overwhelming when you're trying to do something good. It's overwhelming when you realize, it could be one of two things. Either you're either a lot of global events or local events, just any events that impact us on a macro or micro level. A lot of these events, either it's people that have absolutely no idea what they're doing, or it's people with bad intentions in mind. And those things will trump the guy that holds the elevator door for the person, or somebody who's volunteering and trying to give something back around Thanksgiving. The bad story, we remember the bad. The good is, it's easily overlooked, but it's hard to do what we do because we're trying to earn a living so that we can provide for, just like every other human. You want to be able to take care of yourself, and you want to be able to live a comfortable existence. We don't all need yachts, for God's sake, but we all want a comfortable existence. And that's how most adults, begin their life, saying, all right, what do I want to get? How do I get the money to do it? How do I turn things into an experience that I want to have, instead of, slaving for decades only to get cut a few months before your pension kicks in, and all your savings and retirement are gambled away in some subprime housing crisis and derivative market Wall Street created bullshit. We all need to take care of ourselves financially. And any activist, it's like, all right, well, how do I work so that I'm trying to leave a positive reaction out there, whether it's radio shows, whether it's running websites, whether it's just disseminating information, trying to organize people, create political movement, change horrible legislation, elect people that are going to defend our maximum liberty instead of try to sneak it away because they've been bought and sold by corrupt corporations that were run by former corrupt politicians that were financed by corporations. And you see that it becomes one of those double helix where you can't figure out which one started and which one ended. And it's a hard thing to do, Dan, is to do this well. 3.5 years in, I know it. And what I'm excited for is teaming up with other smart people, brainstorming, having sessions of really just trying to figure out how to make amazing things happen with other great people. That's the short answer. I'm interested in working with SI because I want to do a lot of great things with a lot of amazing people. And we can move mountains if we have enough people pushing in the right direction. That's why I'm interested in SI. There's your bumper sticker you could pull out and use for a radio spot.
Solutions Institute, we launched January 1st, 2015. That is next year, by the way. The Solutions Institute, you can find us on Twitter at ActivistHelp, Facebook, facebook.com/ActivistHelp. You can find us on the web, solutions-institute.org, and we will be in a online source, or we will be in an interview near you in January. We're very excited for the launch, very excited to do what we can to help really just do our best to tweak what the activist community can do.
Yeah, a little shot of adrenaline, a little boost in the right direction. Yeah, I think a lot of us, we're running on hamster wheels, and we try real hard and we spend a lot of time, but are we really getting the effort, getting the results for the effort that we're putting in? And, you know, we're all busy people, but we want what we do to be multiplied in the most efficient way, and I'm looking forward to it. So the best way to keep updated with it is the website, and tell us real quick in a couple seconds here, maybe about a minute, just the launch in general. How do you see it coming at, hitting everybody? What's it going to look like? What's it going to sound like? What's the vibe of it? Why should people care? How do they get involved? Give us that, the launch.
Teams have coaches. Corporations have consultants. Politicians have campaign managers. Activists have had nothing, have had no one until now. It's going to explode, Brian. And people can keep an eye on it. Solutions-institute.org. You can sign up for our email list. Tweet us at ActivistHelp if you have a question or you need some assistance. And we're very much looking forward to revolutionizing activism in this country.
Well, Dan, hey, to be continued. We're going to have a lot of chats over the next few months, next few days for that matter. And I really do think we're warmed up. Preseason's over. It's time to step on the field. I really do think like it's go time. This is go time for all of the things that we want to create. I think it's now. So yeah, definitely everybody check out what Dan's up to as we all take this these first couple of steps in this new chapter here. So Dan, hey, thank you again, man, for joining us and on all the topics that we covered, because I know we didn't really limit this any one particular spot, but I don't think our conversations ever stay on course with any pre-designed business plan. We just roll with it, but it's always a pleasure to have you, man. I certainly appreciate your time.
Rest in peace, Eric Garner and his family, and you have a great night, Brian.
All right, take care and stay safe. There he goes, everybody. Check out what he's up to, really, and rest in peace as well to the guy. The guy, actually, this song that you're listening to, Metro, Sean Flynn. Tomorrow will be 3 years since he passed away. He was one of my best friends, the drummer in my band, and the guy, well, I put this song together with Johnny Rabb, and it's called Metro by Twist of Nothing, the band that we were starting again prior to him passing away. But yeah, rest in peace, Sean. I don't know where the New American Media would be without you. And yeah, we're gonna go see your memorial. We're gonna go see your bench coming up here for the anniversary. I know we got your name looking out at the Pacific Ocean, so this show's dedicated to you as we kind of continue to fight for freedom over here at thenewamericanmedia.com. My name is Brian Engelman. Special thanks to guests Blake Walley and Dan Johnson. I appreciate having both of them. If you haven't checked out thenewamericanmedia.com, do so. On the middle right-hand side, it's the TNAM radio link. That's where you listen live. Underneath that, you sign up for Facebook. Underneath that, you do Twitter. That's at American_media_. And please subscribe. YouTube.com/TheNewAmericanMedia. YouTube.com/TheNewAmericanMedia. We just surpassed 400,000 video views. Man, I really appreciate you. I love you. And we'll be back soon. Just appreciation on, so close to Thanksgiving. I'm thankful for all of you, and we'll talk again soon. All right? Have a good one. Peace.
Your guide to the truth. TheNewAmericanMedia.com.